Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the November 27th Newmarket Budget Committee. We'd like to open with public forum, and seeing that there is no one here from the public, we'll close public forum at 6:31. Tonight, we have an updated agenda which we sent around earlier, and the package which is in front of you includes the updated information. The agenda on the top. We'll talk later about the calendar. That's included in here. The next document is the details of what Todd is going to present to us this evening. And then we have the minutes from the October meeting as well. So let's welcome Superintendent Todd Allen to talk about Q1 fiscal year 24. Excuse me, before you do that, let's take attendance. Ned Carpenter.
Here.
Brian Hickey.
Here.
Richard Lissavoy.
Here.
Danielle Holman.
Here.
Brian Rowley.
Here.
Scott Foster.
Here.
Tim Choi is excused. Justin Lucer.
Here.
Dan Smith.
Here.
Brian Ward.
Here.
We're all here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity to come in and talk about our first quarter financials. I believe Chris said you have these documents in front of you, so I will refer to them as I go. So I will try to cite page numbers as I do that. First thing I wanted to just remind you of is that the school district fiscal year runs from July 1 to June 30. So the first quarter of our fiscal year was July 1, 2023 until September 30th, 2023. As you would expect, in a school system, the meat of what we do happens from September through June. So the July-August time window, while there are some expenditures and so forth that are undertaken, it's not surprising that there will be a lot of, you'll notice there's a lot of encumbered funds, but not a lot of expenditures that have been exerted, which is the way it's supposed to be. You pay as you go, as it were. So if you wouldn't mind just looking at page 1 of the document, clearly, as I just said, September. This is a document reflecting the period from July 1 to September 30th. Overall, we feel we're in a pretty good place financially. In fact, if next June 30th, I'm standing before my school board telling them that we have an unexpended fund balance of $1.7 million, I'll feel very good about that. That's a very healthy place to be. So if you look to the second page, the top of that, you'll see a chart. It kind of breaks down sort of the bottom line as to where we are at. As of right now, we have an unexpended fund balance of $1,714,597. And you'll see that that's broken up into 3 different categories of information. You can see we have a positive variance in salaries of $466,077, positive variance in benefits of $114,857, and a positive variance in operations of $1,133,664, which again all tolls that current fund balance. Some things to keep in mind, and I'll refer to some of these things later on as I speak, but just school districts really don't have a lot of sources of revenue, unlike towns where there's lots of different fees and so forth. For the most part, we have 3 places that money comes to us. The vast majority of school district funding comes from local taxpayers through the local tax rate. We get state revenues, often referred to as adequacy aid. You'll hear terms like net education grant and SWEPT, statewide education property tax. Again, I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But those are, from the state, those are the 2 places where money comes to the district. And then really the other level of funding that we have to work with is just federal grants. We often refer to them as the title programs, Title I, Title II, Title IV, and IDEA grants. And those are funds that we access as we use them. So particularly, like you'll notice in the special ed world, a lot of stuff is reimbursable as you go. So you will see that the revenues which we will receive have not been received yet, but they are to come down the road as we utilize those funds. So again, I'll talk about that again in just a minute. I did want to give you a quick update of our food service program. One of the things that's been kind of interesting during the pandemic, and now really last year was the first year out of the pandemic. During the pandemic, all lunches were free. So basically all lunches were reimbursable. So it was not uncommon to have a pretty healthy balance in your food service account. We are fortunate that bringing forward to the 23-24 school year, we have a balance of $121,000 in our food service account. I don't want to mislead anybody. We're back to the way that things historically were done pre-pandemic, where we pay as we go. I would say 99.9% of school lunch programs do not make money. They break even at best. And so generally it's not surprising at the end of a fiscal year to have cost overruns of $15,000 to $20,000. And I was looking back because we didn't have any, we had a very small debt last year of I think $14,000. But looking back pre-pandemic, it was not uncommon to have a $30,000 a cost to have to incur in the food service program. So that $120,000, it has to be used for food service programs. So it's not something we can return to the taxpayers. It just continues to float forward, and we use it as we go. And when it's gone, it's gone. Okay. But right now we're in a very healthy place, and certainly we're doing everything we can to manage our food service program as efficiently as possible. A couple of other things I wanted to mention, kind of as a lead into some of the other conversations. We do a lot of applying for grants. Last year we did we got 2 different SAFE grants for totaling $140,000 that we used for some school security upgrades. There is a SAFE Grant 3 that they are now promoting, that they're encouraging people to apply. We have applied for that. I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not terribly optimistic we're getting it because they're saying they're going to prioritize people who didn't get it in the first round for this round. But hey, it's still worth giving it a shot. But anyway, that was $140,000 that we were able to bring in and do some real positive improvements in our school security systems. So we're very proud of that. A couple of other things I wanted to mention just in terms of things we're proud of in the district that have been accomplished. In fact, last Monday, we did the official dedication of the new elementary school playground. I don't know if anybody's had a chance to get over there and play on the playground. If you did, please stay off it. You're going to break it. It's for kids. No, I'm kidding. But I'm told, I wasn't there the Sunday before the dedication, but there were hundreds of Newmarket kids over there playing and having a wonderful time, and reviews right now are very positive for the quality of the playground. But just wanted to remind you that 70% of the cost of that project was paid through grant funding and private donations. So the PTA and some other generous donors contributed about $50,000, and we were able to secure just over $400,000 in grants. So basically, $200,000 of that will likely be coming from capital reserve funds later on down the road. So just realize that we got a really top quality playground with minimal local tax impact. We really worked hard to make that happen. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention to you, and for those of you who are on the budget committee in past years, some of the detail in this report you're seeing is different than what you see in the past. One of the reasons for that is we have done a financial software conversion, and we have a new financial software system that called ERP Pro, and it really is making a big difference in our ability to track things and to look at financial numbers in very different ways, and to be able to particularly track expenses in a more specific way. Just to give you a general example, in the past, prior to this system, if the English department at the high school had a certain amount of money budgeted for supplies, you would have just a lump sum of money for that purpose. In this software system, you can break it down by, okay, what was spent for freshman English, what was spent for, and you can actually track it in all different cost areas, so you can have a much better understanding of where is the money going and what's it being used for. So we're very hopeful that will provide us a better quality of information going forward. Just one thing to say, because this is the first year of this new software system, we don't have historical data in the system yet, so we can only compare ourselves to our current year. But in the documents they gave you, we'll talk about this on December 11th when I share the proposed budget, you'll see historical data there. It's just presented in a slightly different way than we have historically done. But as we move forward, there will be lots more historical data and being able to really go into the more granular stuff, which I'm excited about. I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to looking at stuff like that. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. If you would flip to page 5 in the packet. Well, actually, first I'll mention page 4. Page 4 is simply a much more detailed breakdown of the chart that you saw at the top of page 2. Kind of goes through all the different categories. But if you go to page 5 and the top of page 6, you'll see that each of these items explains why the variance exists in every individual line. And I'm not going to read through the whole thing with you, but just to give you a general idea, probably the biggest thing that we've done a lot of shifting around when it comes to salaries for a number of variables. One, we did a detailed salary study of all of our non-collective bargaining employees to make sure that the salaries we were offering were in line with surrounding competitive districts, and we did have to make some adjustments to salaries because we wanted to make sure that we were in the right market in terms of hiring and keeping good people. So that's one thing you'll notice. Other areas you'll notice that there's been some shifting around. For example, if you look at in the paraprofessionals line, you'll see it's a $299,000 positive variance. That's because some of it is we haven't been able to hire all the people we need, but some of it we've been able to repurpose positions that have previously been something else. And so it shows up in the balance as a positive variance, and it is, but that's why it shows up the way it does. And in the past, we weren't able to tease that kind of detail out. One thing we have also learned in just working with our staffs, when you ask questions like, what causes a good employee to stay long-term? Certainly salary is part of it, but there are a lot of other things that factor in. And one of the things we discovered, particularly with our office assistants, was having a more flexible schedule. They actually preferred that to necessarily getting a higher salary. So one of the things we were able to do is adjust their work year to still meet the needs of the district, but actually ultimately reduce the amount of time they were working. So they had more time off. We're still able to get the work we needed to get done, but it shows up as a positive variance in that salary line. So when you see the support salary support administrative, a reduction of $72,749. That was simply because we had conversations with employees about how we can readjust work schedules and make that work better for everybody. We did also make a number of other adjustments in salaries for various things. Probably the biggest thing that you may have questions about is some of our positions that had historically been grant funded, particularly Title I. What we've seen is the amount of revenue we're getting from Title I is dropping. So positions in the past we have historically been able to pay for out of a Title I grant. We've had to shift into the local budget to pay for it. And what we've then done is take the Title I money and attached it to other areas. So when you look at hold on a second, excuse me. I've lost my line here, hold on. Yeah, if you look at the salaries, other educational, you'll see there's been a lot of shifting around of things, and a lot of that came about simply because we had to make adjustments to positions in order because we couldn't use grant funding anymore because it wasn't enough for those positions. And next week or 2 weeks when I talk to you about the 24-25 budget, we're going to talk about the impact of the loss of ESSER funding on our budget, and those are things that's important to keep in mind, that we're trying to, one of our goals as we plan out our financing is to level things off and not experience dramatic spikes when things shift. And so what we've tried to do is to do it over a period of time and not just suddenly say, hey, we ran out of money, boom, here it is. So some of these adjustments we made this year, knowing next year we're going to have to make even further adjustments because we're going to lose those funds entirely. The other thing, if you look at the salary benefits line, you'll see that there's a significant up there. Reason for that is when you reduce positions, that means there's less FICA, there's less all of those other things you have to pay. So again, it shows up as a positive. And actually one of the big ones, if you go down to the next line, you'll see 51,000 from New Hampshire retirement. So once you stop paying people as many people's salaries, all of those things go down commensurately. So when you look at the $1,714,597, you'll see a good almost 600,000 of that is just simply reductions in salaries and benefits, that all tied to those adjustments being made. Kind of continuing on to page 6. A number of things, again, we're a school district and the meat of our work happens between September and June. A lot of these things are positive variances because we haven't done it yet. So like, for example, you'll see professional development. There's a lot of professional development to come that will be paid for. We just haven't done it yet. Professional services, a lot of that is tied to contracts with special education, transportation, and so forth. Again, their expenses still to come. One that I got the bill just the other day for tuition for SST for kids going to the Seco School of Technology for career tech programs. That $170,000 in tuition is going to go away pretty quickly because we owe about $140,000 for students going to SST. So some of these positive variances, you got to understand we're a school district. Our job is to provide education. So it's good to have a strong fund balance, but obviously there are expenses to come down the road. Kind of moving along. Ultimately, if you want to look at the last page, page 8, where we tried to break it down by kind of our financial statement. Again, one of the things you got to understand is all of our revenues, it's not like on day one we have $26,952,000 in our bank account and we just spend it over the course of time. So all of these revenues come in at different times, and you'll see that on the financial statement, most of it is negative. Don't take that as a bad thing. It's just money that hasn't come to us yet. One of the big things is when the town collects taxes, they pay it to us once a month. So we get basically a payment of somewhere around $1.5 million every month. And obviously at this point, we're only 3 months into the year. So there's a lot that we haven't received yet. State revenues, again, we haven't received those yet, but they will come. Food service revenues, basically what we have to do there is we have to account for what we expect the cost of the program to be, but then obviously over the course of the year, we're getting reimbursements for lunches. Kids are paying for lunches. There's money coming in that will obviously offset that $355,000. Again, end of last year, we had about a $14,000 deficit, and that's basically what I would anticipate, something in that ballpark again. And then the federal revenues, we have to account for them in our budget, but again, we haven't acquired those funds yet. We haven't, so they haven't actually arrived here yet, so they show up as a negative. So with that, I'll stop there. Are there any questions about the Q1 financial statements? Bottom line is we're in a good place. We're right where we normally are at this point. There's a lot to happen. We got 9 more months of a school year. Things can happen that are unexpected, but I think we're doing a pretty good job of managing our finances. Yeah.
You made a comment that we're getting less Title I money.
Mm-hmm.
Why? What makes that happen?
Basically, in the public education world, there are a few metrics that are used to drive neediness or need for schools, and one that is commonly used is the percentage of your kids that access free and reduced lunch. The higher free and reduced lunch percentage you have, typically the higher you get in most of the grant programs, okay? And you can look at that one of 2 ways. One thing might be a lower free and reduced lunch, might be a higher ability of community members to pay. Therefore, that's a good thing. One variable that we constantly look at, though, is do we have everybody who really is truly eligible on the list? And I would tell you this year in particular, because during the pandemic, people just stopped doing free and reduced lunch applications, and sort of it fell off the radar. And so a lot of our work has been trying to re-educate people about the program and trying to get them to apply if they might be eligible. There are very clear guidelines that the feds use to get free and reduced lunch, but then that percentage is used in lots of calculations, including, by the way, the state adequacy aid grants. They use free and reduced lunch there too.
I was going to ask, the next question was, you talked about the difference in revenue from last year. One of the reasons that the tax rate seemed to really hit home more or go up. And I believe you maybe sent the email to us or something that said, or passed it on.
Right.
that we got less back from the state.
Yeah, and actually, that was one of the things I was going to kind of talk about, because obviously, just about the end of October, the tax rates were set, and there's no question. In fact, I don't live in Newmarket, but I got my tax bill in Lee, and it's not that much different than the experience I'm sure Newmarket taxpayers are facing, but it's a pretty hefty jump. And basically, what has occurred to Newmarket is the state aid that we get comes, as I said before, in two forms. One is just a net grant. The more you can get in a net grant, the better, because you don't have to, that's not money collected locally. It's just money usually from lottery, liquor sales, all the things that the state does to generate revenue, and then that money is given to you. So the more you can get in a net grant, the better. What has happened to us is our grants have dropped dramatically. 2 years ago, we received just over $3 million in grant funding. Last year, when we planned the budget for 23-24, we were told that we were going to get $2.3 million, or a $700,000 shortfall from the grant. What actually ended up happening when we got our tax rate set was we got $2,607,000. So for those of you, for people who are not taxpayers in Newmarket, I was like, oh wow, that's $307,000 more than we thought we were going to get. So on one level, that's a positive. The negative is, compared to the previous tax year, we got $466,000 less from the state in grant aid. Now you combine that with the other way we get money from the state. It's called the statewide education property tax, and that is a tax rate that is collected locally. And so basically what happened there was, when the state recalculated what was considered adequacy, and they determined $4,100 was considered adequate, the big thing they did was statewide education property tax went up. So what happened to us in Newmarket was, in 2022-23, we only were charged $1.4 million for statewide property tax. Okay, now that's a big number, but for this year, it's $1,973,000. In other words, $566,000 more dollars being collected locally to get to the same place. So when you combine the 466 lost in the net grant with the 566 more being collected in the statewide property tax to the Newmarket taxpayer, that's $1 million shifted from the state to Newmarket taxpayers. And when you look at that in terms of the Newmarket budget, and thank you, Newmarket, for having such even numbers when it comes to thinking ahead. The fact that the town of Newmarket has $1 billion in property values, and our budget is generally around $26 million, you can do the math pretty quickly, but $1 million of shift works out to be about $1 on the 1,000 of every single taxpayer in the community, which is a big chunk. And when you look at that compared to, again, we're in a better place than we thought we were going to be, but compared to where we really were, we're not as well off. I would tell you, and I don't want to be spoiler alert when I present the 24-25 budget, but we're in a slightly better place heading into 24-25 than we are right now. Because right now what we're having to do is figure out, people are getting their tax bills and they're realizing my taxes went up $600, $700, $800, and that's a big number. Yeah?
So the second piece you mentioned was the statewide, the $500,000. I wasn't sure I understood what drove that again. Why did that go up $500,000?
Well, the state determined, the legislature had to determine what they considered adequacy for, and again, I'm sure if anybody's been following news, there's an awful lot of conversation these days about what constitutes adequacy. But when the state legislature passed and the budget was approved for this upcoming year, the number they were using was $4,100, which is about $400 per student more than the previous year. So when they did their calculations, they changed the net grant, kind of going back to the question about free and reduced lunch and all that kind of stuff. They changed the formula for awarding grant aid, and they made it more based on need, which is why Newmarket lost, because we had a lower number of free and reduced lunch students compared to other districts. But that didn't change the fact that they still had to award us $4,100 per kid. And so where does the difference, and so basically, in order to make that up, it's about $566,000, which was the increase, which is a big increase, by the way. I mean, our statewide property tax rate for last year was $1.40 on the thousand. It's now $1.97 on the thousand. It's a big jump.
So the reality is, when you look at your budget, which I think was 3.5% increase last year.
3.9.
Right, and so then I get my tax bill and I say, gosh, what am I missing here? Because I know you're 70-something% of it. And so with those two wild cards, you don't really know.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think one of the things, as I said before, one of our goals in the school district, and I know Steve feels very much the same way in the town, is you want to level off your expenses. You don't want to have lots of spikes, but you can only control the variables you can control for. And so like last year when we were building the budget, and again this year, and again, I don't know spoilers, I'll talk to you about the budget later, we really were very cognizant of wanting to keep the appropriation side of the equation down. I mean, last year it was 3.9, the upcoming one is 4.3, and we've really tried to do that. The trouble is the variables that we have zero control over, what we get in state aid, changes wildly. And I mean, you think about like a shift of $1 million in 1 year, that's a dramatic shift. Without getting too political here, there clearly is an awful lot going on in the state now with the Conval lawsuit and the fact that the education funding mechanisms are certainly going to be called into question here in the coming years. If I were a betting man, I don't anticipate any of that to affect the 24-25 budget because I guarantee it's going to go to the Supreme Court again before anything is done. But clearly, there's a significant discrepancy here in what constitutes adequate education in New Hampshire. And, if we had certainly the $7,356.01, which is currently what the judge ruled is considered adequate, versus the $4,100, we would be having a very different conversation here. Of course, that also is contingent upon how the state raises that funds. And if they do it by raising this local property tax, it won't actually get us anywhere.
Yeah, it's something I dare say very, very few taxpayers understand. Is on March, all you do is approve what the school district and the town, each in their own right, are allowed to spend. You're not voting on a tax rate. That's not how state law works. You're just saying, here's the total amount they're allowed to spend. Now, where does that come from? The State Department of Revenue takes what the voters approve to spend, and they say, here are the deducts for all the sources of revenue that are not local taxation. Whatever's left in one form or another, again, for the school district, it's either the local property tax or SWEPT, the statewide educational property tax. Whatever doesn't come from somewhere else has to come from those two sources. And people are certainly, some people are conceptually celebrating the Conval decision, but the thing to keep in mind is all the judges said is that adequate isn't here, it's here. It's still well within the purview of the legislature to say, okay, fine, but the difference is all going to come from SWEPT anyway, which doesn't change anything. Now, the other piece of the decision that could change things is the idea that towns that collect more SWEPT than they spend on education shouldn't be able to keep it and refund it to their taxpayers. That could make a difference, but again, it's going to take a very long time for that to make its way through the courts, my guess.
When we presented the 23-24 budget, one of the things we tried to do was capture what the tax impact might be, because that is something we're asked to do on the warrant so that people can look at each warrant article. I'm pleased to report we were really, really wrong about that, but we were really, really wrong in a much higher way than we thought we were going to be. Last year, you may recall, between the combination of the statewide property tax and local property tax, we predicted that we were going to have a $3.35 on the 1,000 increase just to maintain a 3.9% school budget. It actually came in at, now it's $2 on the 1,000 for the whole thing. So it is, again, I know from a taxpayer perspective, it doesn't change the fact that you've got to come up with $700-800+ to cover that bill, but it is a heck of a lot better of a place than we were expecting to be. And I know that doesn't make it easier to pay your tax bill. Like I said, I'm doing the same thing in Lee and feeling the same pinch. But yeah, I would say if there was one thing that would make things so much more clear in terms of school funding would be can we just have a clear, consistent pattern of funding so we know what we're working with? And frankly, even if it's lower, if it's consistent and not doing this all the time, it's really hard to hit a target that is constantly it's like someone holding a dartboard and doing this with it and saying, come on, hit the target, but it's moving all the time. So all we're left to do, as Dan said, is to start from the idea of refocus on the appropriation side of the equation. And last year it's 3.9, this year it's 4.3. Everything that we put into our budget, we very carefully consider. Every time a position comes open, we take a look at it, we ask, do we really need this position? And we only fill the ones that we really believe we do need. But in the end, with inflation running, 3-4, and actually when we built the 23-24 budget, the inflation was running at 7.7%, which was just insane. So when you're trying to anticipate that and build a budget, it is challenging. Any other questions on the tax side?
I'm just, so I actually, when I saw these documents come through, started reading a little bit because I didn't understand adequacy age,
Yep.
SWEP at all, and stuff like that. And so came across all the flux that's going on. I was surprised by the level of volatility that is on the revenue side that you're, if I'm understanding it all correctly, you're essentially being asked to create a budget completely absent of your revenue.
Right, so you're focused on what you need, but you're not focused on what you have to pay for.
And I'm curious, is that like a New Hampshire problem with the way our state is set up? Is that kind of a national education issue, Is there like a model that has fixed this?
I do think the level of volatility is a uniquely New Hampshire issue, but I'm not going to lie to you. Go to Maine, go to Vermont, go to Massachusetts. It doesn't feel any better at the local level in terms of taxes. It's not, because shifting things around and paying for it in form of a broad-based income tax, things like that, don't necessarily reduce the cost that is incurred. It just spreads it out a little differently. But yeah, New Hampshire, two things are kind of a little bit of a tug of war here. One is a strong belief in local control and wanting to maintain local control, which as New Hampshire, and I think it's a great thing. I think the fact that the town of Newmarket gets to call the shots on what they want in the town of Newmarket and can protect its own and all that, that's good. Except that the flip side of that is local control means local responsibility to pay. And one of the things going back to the original Claremont lawsuit that was filed, there was a lot of the talk about unfunded mandates, and that was the big thing. So the state has become very good at creating rules and regulations that ultimately don't pay for anything but require districts to pick up something. So when they do something like every kid has to do the civics exam to graduate, which by the way is a great thing. We want kids to be civically aware, but there's not any money attached to it, so we got to figure out how to make those kind of things happen locally. And I think that's kind of what's going on here. And then, the one thing which will show up when we talk about 24, 25 is during the pandemic, ESSER 1 and 2 gave us a lot of money that, without casting judgments, was used in different ways over the last couple of years. And particularly when we used it to pay for needed positions, when that source of revenue went away, we then had to say, okay, it's a necessary position, now what? And that means a higher burden locally.
Another quick question. The free and reduced lunches, if I heard you correctly, you mentioned that those dropped off and that will stop.
Basically, it went to zero because you didn't have to. Everybody got free lunch.
Do you have a sense of the disparity between where it currently is and where you suspect it should be, just based on historical trends, or I don't know, is that a clear question?
I mean, Newmarket, I don't think in recent years has had a significantly high percentage of free and reduced lunch. I mean, right now, we're less than 10%. In fact, I want to say it's like 9%. You might have seen it as high as 15 to 20% in bygone times, and certainly we may get there again as more people become aware of it. But I think the other thing that people don't realize is how much free and reduced lunch is tied to all these other revenue sources as well. So it's not just, are you eligible for free and reduced lunch? Even if you don't choose to use it, if you're eligible, it actually can increase the revenues to the school district. Any other questions?
This is just a general question. How much of an influence does the federal Department of Education have on your curriculum and what you teach?
That's not an easy question to answer. I mean, there aren't a lot of federally mandated requirements other than things like ADA and special education and those kind of things, but those have been in existence for quite some time. I would tell you certainly if the Office of Civil Rights decided to do an audit of everything and found things that we potentially, which I'm not saying we do, but if they came in and did some kind of an audit and discovered there were inequalities in how we handle things, that could potentially have a financial impact. But there aren't a lot of, other than, like I say, special education, equal opportunity, those kind of things. But in terms of actual school programming, that's the state. It's largely the state.
So I'm just looking at this. The federal government's providing about 4.5% of your budget.
Mm-hmm.
But you talk about ADA requirements and things of that nature. You have special education requirements. How much of your budget's actually spent towards supporting students who require those services?
I think there's the chart in the budget book. I think has. I want to say it's about 20%.
20%. I'm just wondering because obviously, the federal government isn't providing enough support for that, covering those that type of educational support. This is a big number. The amount that it costs per pupil that requires special education and ADA type support is a significant number.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think there's enough. Want to talk funding sources? There's no question. Fully funding any of the programs that exist would make a big difference, but none of them have been fully funded, at least in my professional lifetime. I've been at this a while.
And I mean, just for a bit of context, the percentage of our budget that covers special education is actually down. Mm-hmm. My first year on the budget committee, we were up near 30%. Mm-hmm. Now, some of that has to do with the bond payments on the school buildings. That inflated the rest of it, so to speak, but I think a number of, I would love to think, and I just don't have the numbers to prove it, but I would love to think the move toward full-day kindergarten and expanding the preschool program have helped to, I don't think it's reduced the number of children who need those services, but has perhaps helped us to get an earlier start on providing them to reduce the impact of the need in later years.
Yeah, a good preschool, kindergarten, first grade program will do an awful lot to mitigate the long-term special education needs for sure.
Any other questions? Great, thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I'll see you on December 11th.
Before you go,
Sure.
Well, I don't have any other questions for you, but what I'd like to do is just jump into a quick on the school and on the town budget. So today, the town was supposed to present, and there was a change in schedule early today. So we're talking about moving. Todd, Steve, and I had a conversation about this earlier today, and we agreed that we would do the school and the town presentation at the next meeting on December 11th. You now have both budgets. You've got a hard copy of the school budget, and you have a soft copy of the town budget. Is everyone able to print their own copy of the town budget, or would you like me to print it and have it mailed to you? Pardon me?
I actually grabbed them from Steve's office.
You did, okay.
Yeah, I did.
All right. Okay, I just want to make sure that you have the resources that you need. So the thoughts, and I want to toss this out to make sure everyone's together on it, is that we would use the next meeting, because a lot of information will be conveyed. We have 2 weeks to review the documents, and then they're going to make their presentation. If you have questions during the presentation and so forth, obviously you're welcome, we encourage people to ask them. But we're going to use the December 18th meeting as a second opportunity to, after you receive the presentation and you have the budgets, is to prepare questions and submit those on the 13th. By the 13th, back to myself, and we'll get them back to Steve and Todd, and then they can get to the various town administrators, in the different departments, and be able to provide answers back for the 18th. So the 18th is an opportunity to have a deeper dive into the budget and a deeper dive into your questions and concerns. Does that sound like a good plan for everybody? Okay, great.
Yes.
Great. The next meeting will be it'll be a slogger with an hour and a half with presentations, but we want to give everyone the opportunity to review everything and come back with your thoughts. You can, obviously, if you have thoughts as they're going along, we'll do it, but then you'll have time to consider and reflect, and then do a little bit more deeper dive. Okay? Okay, great, thank you.
We're all set?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Todd.
So thank you very much. All right, so with that, okay, so in the package, you have this document here, which you've seen before. You've seen this before. So what we just talked about is, so on the 11th, which will be 2 weeks from today, both the town and the school will present. I told those guys to flip a coin to decide who's going to go first, but and then obviously any questions that you have from reading the budget and so forth, you're welcome to ask then. And then we'll take the 18th for further questions. Okay, so you can take the time to review and compare and think. So with that, we will have that completed, and then on the 8th, we have our public hearing. And then on the 22nd of January, we're required to vote on the town and the school budget. Okay?
Yeah, just, so the 11th, is that still going to be down here at 6:30, regular time?
Pardon me? Here.
The meeting on December 11th, will that be here at the regular time, or?
Yes.
Like at 6, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yep. I should say, no one's told me anything different, though.
Okay.
For the public hearing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Very good. Okay, so I'm not sure if everyone's had a chance to read the minutes from the October 23rd meeting. That's okay. Yeah. So the only people, Brian wasn't here, and Ned weren't here, and Scott wasn't here. So, any questions? Any adjustments? No, it's pretty straightforward. Are you certain you said that you said that's?
I mean, I read it, it seemed like what I said.
Yeah, that's a good
Pretty close.
story.
Close enough.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as written.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you very much. Second, made by Rich Lisavoy, seconded by,
Brian Rowley, second.
you were here? Okay, Brian Rowley, second. All those who were here, approve the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
And any abstentions? No, 3 abstentions and no objections. So thank you very much. Okay, so that takes care of that. All right. I'm going to be ahead, so after this meeting, we'll release the next agenda so that it has a chance to make its way through the system. Do I have a motion to adjourn? I should say, anything else? Anybody else have anything they'd like to say? We're all good? All right. Get some rest before the 11th meeting. A motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, made by Ned, second by Brian Ward. And all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.